other than Megan and myself, we'll take our time to introduce each other or to introduce ourselves. Okay, well, thank you everybody for doing the introductions. Let me kind of introduce myself, and then we'll just go through some housekeeping, and then we'll get to, well, I'll introduce myself, Megan. Actually, Megan, do you want to introduce yourself? Then I'll introduce myself and do the housekeeping stuff.
Sure. My name is Megan Hochbein, and I am the Director of Operations with Exodus Refugee Immigration. And I have been at Exodus now just over 10 years. In that time, this is my 5th role, actually. I started as a volunteer coordinator for a period of time. I facilitated a program called Individual Development Accounts for Refugees. So a savings program to build assets within the refugee community. And then moved into a kind of a legal service position, which maybe I'll talk about a little bit more. And now I supervise our reception and placement program, which is the program basically which we welcome new arrivals, excuse me, into the United States and provide case management and housing services for a period of time after the initial resettlement.
And I'm one of Megan's big cheerleaders. So hi, Megan.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm delighted to see you.
Thanks. So good.
Every time I know Maria from my work too at Exodus, and Maria's a hugger and I'm a hugger, and man, do I miss hugs, you guys.
Yeah, right? Hopefully soon again we'll be able to embrace. Okay, so let me give you a little intro to myself, and then we'll kind of talk about what kind of how tonight's going to go, and then we'll get into the book a little bit. I have some questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts, that kind of thing. So let me introduce myself. My name is Rachel Van Tyle. I am the Director of Immigrant Services at the clinic. I've been at the clinic about 8.5 years, and have my work has shifted. Although I technically have a different title, I really have kind of been in an attorney role the whole time. When I first started at the clinic, with 2012, we were still in the height of our Burmese refugee resettlement. And so I did a lot of work with Burmese refugees, but over time, my population has shifted, and now I do mostly removal defense. So I work with our Spanish speaking, sorry, this is one of my animals being problematic. I told you this was going to happen. One of them was going to try and jump up or something. Now I work mostly with our Spanish speakers seeking protection from deportation. So I've worked with a variety of people. I love working at the clinic. My parents, the good professors that they always told me, it's more important to wake up and be excited to go to work than any amount of money you could get paid. And so I'm grateful to say that that is how I live my life, that I wake up most days. Although I tell you what, this daylight savings time, like right here at the end, is hard. I'm like, it's still black outside. I need to be asleep. So I can't always wake up on time, but I am always excited to be to work usually. So, so I want to give you a few options on how to watch this. You can either watch in what's called speaker view, which means the person who's talking will be all of your screen, or it can switch to gallery view. You can see everybody's boxes right now. That's gallery view. But if you want to change it, you just hover over the top right corner where it says speaker view. You can change it, does not matter. You can also turn your camera on or off by stop or start video in the bottom left-hand corner. Know that we are recording this session, just the discussion and everything. So if you're uncomfortable being on camera, it's totally fine. You can turn your camera off, but the rest of it will be recorded. And you can mute and unmute yourself in the bottom left-hand corner as well. It's up to you if you want to do that. So we are able to do this through a grant through the Indiana Humanities in cooperation for the National Endowment for the Humanities. And so we're really thankful for their generosity and their support for us to be able to do this event tonight. So, you know, we're just so grateful for that. So the first part of the event, or first part of the night, we'll talk a little bit about the book, The House on Mango Street. And then, but really what we're going to talk about is things that she said and how it relates to our work and kind of your particular thoughts on immigration or things like that. And then the second half, Megan will lead some of the discussion about her work at Exodus and her perspective on immigration in Indiana. Then we'll have some time for questions. And then we'll also make maybe some recommendations of other books and other things you can engage with, either with the clinic or independently. So if you have questions or comments, I'm happy. I think it's best to have this be like a discussion. So I don't want you to feel like you can't, stop, ask a question. I think there's like a raise hand feature if you want to do that, or you can just start talking, and that's fine. So any questions before we get started? Awesome.
Rachel.
Of course, Maria.
It's not a question, it's a comment, and sorry to embarrass you, but
don't embarrass me.
Beautiful eyes.
Huh?
You really have beautiful eyes.
Oh, thank you.
This is the first time
I am not embarrassed. Please.
Oh, okay,
stop.
good.
Just kidding. Keep them coming.
I didn't realize how beautiful they are. They're very beautiful. The color. So you're welcome.
Very sweet.
I know that's very random, and Jacqueline's probably dying. She's saying, "Oh, how random can you be?" But honestly,
okay. My mom's here. She made them. She's happy to hear it too.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Good job, Mom. Good job.
Well, thank you, Maria. That's sweet. So guys, I would love to hear your thoughts. I have a few things to get us started, but I also want to tell you a little bit just about the work we do at the clinic if you're not familiar with the immigration work we do. So since the clinic's founding in 1994, we have really always had immigration as part of our kind of repertoire. It's waxed and waned in its terms of our staff level and just kind of the work that we do. But right now we're probably the biggest in terms of people and cases that we've ever been. So we actually have two different programs at the clinic. We have our immigrant justice program and our survivor justice program. And I think it's easier to define survivor justice and then just know everything else in immigration goes into immigrant justice. But our survivor justice program is focused around immigrant and non-immigrant survivors of violent crime like domestic violence, sexual assault, things like that. And we pursue both family law remedies and immigration remedies for those individuals. So if they're an immigrant survivor of violent crime, and we know that immigration status can be used as a tool of power in a domestic violence in relation to the domestic violence. And so, what it can be is that I just read this thing, it said there's a delay in my connection. Am I still delaying or I'm okay now? Okay, good. Awesome. So we may pursue a VAWA, which stands for Violence Against Women Act. It's a misnomer. Men can apply too, but it is the protection so that somebody can't say, well, I'm not going to apply for your green card, or I'm going to hold your green card above you, or I'm going to get you deported in the context of maybe a marriage. They can't use that as power if we take that away from them. And so we do that through immigration relief that's specifically available to those individuals. We may also pursue a U visa, which is for a victim of a violent crime. Trent knows this well through his work, and we appreciate all of the relation we get through them. And through the work at the prosecutor's office, we're very grateful for that. But that may be somebody who was the witness to a crime and cooperates in the prosecution of a crime, maybe is able to get a visa to remain in the United States. And then kind of everything else falls into our immigrant justice program, which is where my particular casework lies. So that includes applying for asylum, reuniting families. In fact, Megan and I have had the opportunity to work together on several cases. One of my favorites of which is a story where Megan invited me to go to the airport with her, and was a client that I had worked with the paperwork and getting the family to reunite. And for those of you who were at my JFA talk, this is similar to what I said there, but and actually, I think my mom went with me too. She was able to see it. So this client that I'd helped file the paperwork so the family could reunite, the boy had never met his dad, because when the dad had left, the wife was pregnant, and it had been, I want to say, at least 3 years between the time that they had seen each other. And so I got to witness the first time this kid met his dad and this dad met his son, and it was just so meaningful. And that's part of the reason I love what I do. But I also reflected on the fact that my father is the child of a World War II veteran and didn't meet his dad really until he was about 2 or half or 3. So I thought, you know, we're not so different after all, are we? When we get separated by war or by, you know, whatever makes us separate, we're not so different from our neighbors next door. So yeah, so that's just kind of like a little bit about the immigration picture at the clinic. But for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with the clinic in general, we also do, we work with low-income taxpayers, we work with homeless veterans, we work with people who right now, especially facing eviction or landlord-tenant issues in this downed economy. And we work with ex-offenders, helping them get either back on their feet in some way, maybe, you know, helping them get a driver's license, things like that. So really, we do a diverse amount of work at the clinic, and work that I am extremely proud of. And I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I speak for both Amy and Kate and Melanie and our behind the scenes folk. When I say we're extremely proud of all of the work we do, including immigration, but also the tax work and the veterans work and the diversity of experience that we have at the clinic. So jumping into the clinic a little, or the book a little. So one thing that I was told by my mother was, Rachel, I have to keep looking up the words because there was an awful lot of Spanglish in the book if you don't know and read Spanish. Like, I don't think I caught it as much because I like am used to. So when it says mija, I know that means my daughter, right? It's not like for some of us who have that. So I think that was one thing that I found really interesting, was that there was kind of a language that was used. Did anybody else find that like anything in particular? Like, I had no idea what that meant. I had to go look it up. Or I know I can, just by the people on here, I can tell several of us speak Spanish pretty well. So that may not have been an issue for all of us, but I didn't know if anybody had any thoughts about just the like kind of the language difference. And then, yeah, Maria.
I just wanted to share something very interesting, Rachel. In one of the stories called Chancla, Chancla, it's so
Does
interesting.
everybody know what a chancla is?
I don't know if they do or not, but it's a slipper. It's basically a slipper that, you know, that women use, or men could use them too. But it's interesting because in our family, that was, my mother always used a chancla. That was the threat to anything. You know, do you want the chancla?
Like pull it off. Yeah.
Yep. So when I saw her title, that just brought a flood of memories to me. You know, my mom died, it'll be 5 years. And to this date, everyone, all the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they all remember Mama and the chancla. So that touched my heart deeply when I read that.
Oh, that's awesome.
If I could just add to that point, Mom, there was just a text a couple weeks ago with a bunch of cousins on when we talked about the la chancla and like, oh, and who, you know, always used to get the chancla.
Yeah.
So very much agree.
It's like a punishment, but also like kind of a loving thing, right? It's like,
Yes.
it's very unique. Yeah. But
It's
yeah,
like
I thought that was interesting too. La chanclas.
La chanclas. And it's like telling kids in English about paddling. You want to paddling, you talk about paddling, you threaten with to be paddled, or to paddle someone, but you don't really do it. And all you have to do is bring up the paddle, and that's enough to
Exactly.
behavior modification.
Yeah. I remember, not to be like, this is my only semi-political statement tonight, I promise. But like at the first debate I saw after that, somebody said, somebody needs a grandma with a chancla up there to control those two guys because they were just not behaving. And I just thought that was like the perfect imagery. But yeah, that's really, yeah, chanclas. And so it's interesting for you, Maria, that like that evokes a lot of like positive, and maybe Jacqueline too, like a lot of positive memories for you. Like you have fond memories of your grandmother or your mother when you have that. When we think about language like that, how to, you know, in this book, I saw some examples of how, like, that's an example of how language is like connecting us and can be inclusive. But did anybody want to comment on any like roles they see English as being divisive in this book, in life? Yeah, Kate.
I actually, one of the vignettes that like stopped me was on page 76, where it's like no speak English, and it was this mamacita who like comes and doesn't speak English and then like learns very few phrases, and then it's talking about like her son who like is there and now learning English, and the heartbreak she has of like, no, you aren't going to speak that language here. Like,
Yeah.
and the fact that like he was picking that up from TV. And I just thought that was like so fascinating to watch. That kind of break, like in her, I mean, this is how I gauged it, was like a breaking of heritage in her mind of it. And like, she wasn't in that space. And I thought that it was just like, yeah, I don't know. I just felt heart ripped with her of like that she couldn't communicate that way. And then she didn't want her family to communicate that way potentially. And the how that could be divisive instead of being unifying, of being together. I don't know.
Even though she was kind of in a Spanish speaking community too, like she still was felt very isolated from it. It was interesting. I agree. And actually that's one of the places I had a mark too, because I found it also very interesting in that area. Yeah, Trent.
That same story reminded me, I used to work at the legal clinic like 10 years ago, and it reminded me of a client that we had at the time from the Dominican Republic, and she would speak to me in Spanish, but she would use fillers like Spanish. Oh my gosh, Spanish. I don't know.
Yeah.
In English, and it was funny how like those like key phrases she kept saying in English.
Yeah, and I thought, yeah, and I think that's a good point. I also think like the phrases she did know were interesting in this vignette when she talks about he not here. Okay, I get that. No speak English, but then holy smokes. I was like, that's kind of an interesting one that you don't always think like, oh, hey, that's the first thing that I mean, I guess it's better than cuss words, but
Yeah.
But it was interesting. Yeah, for sure. And Kate, to your point about being like her feeling alone, I know we have a colleague at our office whose parents would not let them speak English at home. And they only were allowed to speak Spanish, and they learned English at school, but they were not allowed to speak any English at home because the parents felt like they couldn't communicate. And I can't remember, so Mom, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misremembering, but my uncle is a German immigrant, or he passed away sadly. But of COVID, yes, very recently. So, but he spoke German at home, or would they let them speak English at home? I can't remember.
He taught them English once he started school. So he got lost in kindergarten and couldn't tell the policeman where he lived. So they spoke only German at home. He taught his parents English. And I work at Unhcr clinics. I'm a pharmacist, and we see that a lot, where we tell the school-age child, this is an antibiotic, tell your mother, whatever. Very difficult situation. Obviously, not all prescriptions could I do that for.
Right.
But it seems that the first generation here ends up being the really bilingual one.
Forced to translate. Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking of Teresa, my friend from California, and her mother forbid them to speak Spanish and would not let them take Spanish. Her last name was Salazar, and the mother would not allow them to speak any Spanish at all in the home because she didn't want them to speak with an accent. And so here was somebody whose parents immigrated from Mexico, but 6 children, and none of them had ever taken any Spanish, could read any Spanish, or speak more than just kind of casual in-home conversation, I guess. So it was actually a way to separate herself to separate her children from Mexico, which is kind of the opposite of what you sometimes see.
Yeah. Trent, you had a comment too. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the kind of sad things that we see with my current position, I work as an interpreter at the prosecutor's office, and we see police reports where there was a domestic violence run and the police use the children to interpret for the parents on the scene. It's like, in some ways, like having to be your interpreter for your parents, like forces them to grow up in ways like too fast that a kid shouldn't have to do. And it's sort of frustrating because there's a language line that the police could call that would allow them to interpret, or they could get a Spanish speaking officer on scene if there's one available, but sometimes it's the path of least resistance and they have the kids interpret.
And I think that's particularly Spanish feels very available, but like often when we see other languages too, I think that can be like, it's frustrating to feel like you have to use the Burmese child because you can't find a Burmese interpreter. And I know I've been guilty of that, and we try not to do it as much as we can, but I think that is a kind of an interesting point about language and using children, how children are kind of bridging the gap between like old world and new world almost in some ways, especially when the children are first generation Americans.
Well, and like,
Yeah.
I really like Trent's point about like it makes kids grow up too fast. I think that is honestly, I see that throughout this whole book of like when she's realizing domestic violence or sexual assault or rape and all these different things that
lots
are
of young
happening.
marriages.
Like, all of a sudden growing up really quickly, and to your point, like using language and being used in that way kind of robs you of a childhood to a degree.
Yeah. I think that's kind of, are there any other comments about language? I think it's kind of a good point to transition maybe to a little bit to talk about kind of what I observed as a lot of machismo, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of like young marriages, kind of that point we see in the book. So like,
Rachel, I was gonna, I guess a couple of comments. One, to Trent's point too, not only is it really inappropriate in certain scenarios if law enforcement is involved to ask the child to now interpret about what's happening with his parents or her parents, but also re-traumatizing oftentimes for at least our population who have had negative interactions with law enforcement in their home country or maybe in their host country overseas. So what that does to a child and you know, their relationship with law enforcement is dangerous.
Right.
The other thing that really tears at my heart with regard to this no speak English is how parents have described it to us, that they don't understand what's important to their kids. They don't understand the conversations that they're having. They don't get to know their children's friends. That there's this, you know, they're fearful about what's happening because they don't understand. And having your children represent you in these adult conversations makes people feel small and powerless. And that's, I think, my perspective, what is most damaging in these situations. But in that same chapter, something that actually really brought me joy, and again, kind of in our work, is how they called her Mamacita. And in Congolese culture, we refer to women as mamas. They're always mama, and then if they have 10 kids, you pick a kid. They're, you know, Mama Josephine or Mama Sophia. And this image of Mamacita, you know, it actually took me into the Congolese community and some of these mamacitas within the Congolese community who I just feel like actually have this like robust love and care for their community. So in terms of again that language, like it brought me into a different realm when I heard that word.
You know, we see a similar thing with Nigerians too, where they call all the women mom. They call us all mom. So they're like, thank you, mom. I'm like, who's mom? But it took me a few times the first time, but it is a love of a term of endearment, truly. And I think it speaks to the respect that they give to women and just the role they play, which is good. Yeah, Maria.
I was just going to say about the Mamacita, Megan, to what you were saying is, again, that was another thing that brought, you know, sensitive moments to me, because we always called my mom either mommy or Mamacita, you know. And interestingly enough, Jacqueline will call me Mamacita, and whenever it does to me, that just makes my heart flutter, and it makes me so good. So when I read that, you know, I thought, oh, it just brought back so many nice memories, so many sad memories too. But yes, definitely being able to relate as an immigrant directly to Mexico. And, you know, in our case, when we came, it was not popular to speak Spanish. So they didn't want us speaking Spanish. And so we had to learn English quickly. And none of my siblings wanted to speak Spanish because of that, you know, and I still wanted to speak Spanish, but anyway, it, you know, so many things from the book that were just hitting home.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with all of what's being said. I think I think the shame kind of part that you brought up was also a theme. It was like kind of like shame that they came from a Spanish speaking household, or shame, not like, I don't mean to imply that you are ashamed, Maria, at all, but I just mean kind of like maybe the siblings' reactions about not wanting to speak Spanish had a lot to do with like cultural or community kind of perceived biases or slights, even if they weren't real. Like, I don't want to speak Spanish because it's not popular, it's not cool, or, or I don't want to tell people I come from this neighborhood. I saw a lot of that. And in that, I saw a lot of what I saw was kind of as like desire that she wanted something different than what she had. But then she had a lot of memories about what she did have. This repeated, I want a house of my own. I want a house of my own. But I thought I was particularly touched by page 87, where she writes, "One day I'll own my own house, but I won't forget who I am or where I came from. Passing bums will ask, can I come in? And I'll offer them the attic, ask them to stay, because I know how it is to be without a house." So it's the paying forward of our own shared experience, I think, which I think for me, that was really touching, that like, she wants her own house, she wants her place, she wants to kind of be, not what she thought, not what she had, but she wants to be a refuge still for the people that haven't been able to make it, where she is. And I thought that was really cool.
Rachel, I also
Yeah.
think that's interesting because like the next page literally over, I found that fascinating because like hearing about this idea of like Mamacita and like the respective women and like wanting something different than what she grew up with. And then in Beautiful and Cruel, this idea of like kind of bucking the system of historic women roles and like wanting to be like, no, I'm going to get up with the men and I'm going to get off, get away from the table, and I'm going to show I have power in this different way. And like, it's that interesting tension of like, I want something different, but I also like will respect parts of the things that I've come from as well.
Yeah, and I don't remember, I don't have it marked, but the part where her mom is cooking in the kitchen and saying, I should have stayed in school, I was smart, I could have been a lot, I could have done a lot. That's a repeated theme I see in my own family of, education, like do things, be strong. It's a part of, I think in part, part of maybe a little bit part of an immigrant culture. I know my mom says that her mom said it a lot. They can't take your education away from you. You can never take your education away from you. And so I thought it was kind of interesting. It's the same thing. It's like, I wish I would have realized that like, that's power there. Like being smart is being powerful and that kind of thing. So
I never knew who they were. I knew they did not want me to have an education and I was going to get one anyway. And they were never going to take it away. I just never figured out who the theys were. But my background is Irish. And if you know the Ireland, England situation, so education was prohibited by the Irish. And so the story down in my family was get every education you want. You can't be overeducated. And they, I now know British, can't take it away from you. They can't prohibit you from having it. So yeah, I think wherever the immigrant is in the family, some of that culture comes with you.
Marion, did you have a thought, or were you just kind of sort of raising your hand?
I was just thinking about all the things that you were saying, and what a wonderful appreciation that people have, I think, of a language and the struggle that people have with the language and with some of the things. And I was always identifying with her, thinking, oh my heavens, I'm so sorry that she feels that way, when they were talking about the shoes and the friends and the relationships and how difficult it must have been and how much support we really do need to give them. And I've worked with a lot of, certainly a Hispanic in Bonita, and I'm kind of the translator, although my Spanish is bad, for our maintenance person. And he is he does a lot of work for his church, and we've been trying to help him and his family assimilate, and they are really doing well. But he said a lot of it is by having someone that shows empathy toward them. And not I feel sorry for you here, would you like some money or something like that, but someone who really takes the time to talk to them, to understand And so I'm really impressed with all the things that I'm hearing from everyone. It's hard not to have been there to not understand it. I mean, I have a German background, and I can remember going to church with my grandmother, and everything was in German, and she was so proud of that background. And they wanted to speak English. Nobody spoke anything but German in that church. And I how important that is to preserve that. And what a
Yeah.
great gift to us.
Totally. Yeah. Well, yeah, Trent.
So going back to like the education, sometimes people who have an education in their home country come here, and our country doesn't recognize that educational system. And I've known people that are, I don't know if this is the reason they're not anymore, but that were nurses in their home country. Someone I know like worked for a radio station, like on the broadcasting, and they come here and we don't honor that degree or that background, or maybe because of the language too, and they have to do something else instead of that.
Yeah, and honestly, degree equivalencies are kind of hard to figure out. Like, you theoretically can be evaluated, but it is really hard. I had a client a few years ago who was a doctor in Egypt. He was like an MD, and he was working as a custodian at Butler. And so that was kind of like, whoa, you know, for me, it was kind of two worlds. By the way, Jean Van Tal, Trent Taylor is also a good Butler grad. He's studying at Alcala, right, Trent? Yeah.
Very good.
So, but yeah, Megan.
Rachel, I think that's also it's also just operating under the assumption that someone is able to take with them their transcript or their degree, their paperwork, their, you know, that we're working with folks who've left with nothing. They literally run for their lives, and so they don't even have the papers if they could get them evaluated in the United States. It's a matter of trying to track that information down. So
yeah, really true.
Definitely something, Trent, that we see, that not being able to return to a livelihood and provide for your family in the way that you're used to, and even just to you know, to continue learning, that to start over is years worth of learning.
Right. Totally.
I spent 2 weeks in a nursing home here after falling in our garage and breaking my pelvis, and was surprised that virtually all of my patient care was delivered by foreign graduates, the nurses, and they would all say, you know, I'm an RN in my country, or one of them even was an MD, but the first job they could get, the one that they enjoyed, the one that helped them become self-sufficient first, was being a CNA, and then they could kind of work their way up the list from CNA. So I was very intrigued, and they were all over. You know, they were DRG, but also Ghana and a few other places. Many of them were African immigrants, but for most of the women, I think there were a couple of men as well, but for most of them, first thing they did was took the test to be CNA, and then kind of went from there. So I was very surprised.
If there's maybe one good thing to come from COVID, actually, there was work being done for folks who had certifications overseas in medical fields to kind of fast track them into hospitals and other places. Good. And give them an opportunity more quickly.
Right.
We lost your audio, Rachel. Nope.
One thing that Rachel mentioned recently was she had done a presentation for a group of sixth graders. And going back to the point earlier about, you know, fleeing or leaving without having anything. One of the things that really struck me about the sixth graders' comments, I think it was a note that was written to Rachel, was just the difficulty of leaving your own borders and the courage it takes to leave everything that's familiar, everything that you had, and start completely fresh. And so what I said to Rachel was, you know, her comments to the sixth grade class really are applicable, I think, to kind of our reading tonight and what we've been talking about. But it's so wonderful to see young people understand that and really kind of get the difficulty it must be to leave everything you know for something you don't know, and to leave all you've earned behind, whether it's that degree that you know was hard fought for when you were studying, or anything else, your family members, or all the tangible things that you become accustomed to and really rely on. So I just want to commend Rachel for getting out in the community and really talking to younger people about the importance of empathy and understanding for people who are different from themselves. Your audio is still not working, Rachel. I can't read your lips.
I know. Hang on.
Click on and off.
Megan, maybe while she's doing that, I know like we were going to transition and like to talk a little bit about your experience as well. As Rachel tries to figure out hers, that might be a good transition versus trying to always go back and forth.
Yeah, so I want to spend kind of like Rachel did, talking a little bit about the work that we do at Exodus and the clients that we serve, and again, some of the parallels that I saw to the story, and maybe some questions along the way. And I'm maybe gonna, hopefully not bore you, but I do want to give you some numbers because I think they're important. Exodus as an agency, basically we serve maybe 4 different categories of immigrants. We work with refugees, by definition, are facing persecution, have faced persecution because of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, and as we've said, are outside of their country of origin, unable to go home. We work with asylees, so individuals who have been granted asylum in the United States. We have a new program serving asylum seekers. Just as it sounds, those are the folks who are entering the country or wishing to enter the country and get granted asylum. And then also my colleague Katie, who's with us, I might share maybe later if she's willing, but serve both certified and pre-certified victims of human trafficking. And then the numbers, again, because I want everybody to think about this big picture. At the end of 2019, there were 79.5 million people forcibly displaced from their homes around the world. 26 million are registered under the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, so have interviewed at some point with that agency and been given a paper or a card that says they're under the care and protection. 45.7 million who are internally displaced within their own countries. 4.2 million people seeking asylum. And I do believe that number reflects a growing number of people at our own southern border. And of this number, of this 79.5 million, over half are kids. And I'm going to share some stories that I think are maybe a little bit more personal, but I want everybody to kind of reflect on those numbers because we do serve so few people here in Indianapolis, and the problems around the world that create these situations are so grand. The folks that we're working with at Exodus right now are still Burmese. Rachel said that there was a big group of folks that came from Burma in 2012. That is still one of our largest groups. Folks from the Democratic Republic of Congo are our second largest group, and I would say Eritreans are our third, and then small numbers of folks from El Salvador, Guatemala, Ivory Coast, Central African Republic, Sudan, Afghanistan. And the opportunities for refugees are one of 3. So if someone is outside their country, the first opportunity certainly would be to return home, right? Would be to repatriate back home. And one of the things that I think is important to understand about refugees and people who've been granted asylum, and maybe Rachel will comment if we can hear her, is that once someone is given refugee status or is granted asylum, they more or less have waived their rights to be able to return home. They can't they can't go back. In fact, that's basically what we tell clients if they think about returning to their home country. Maybe they've likely left someone that they love behind. And it reminded me that this idea of what clients have already sacrificed in having or have already lost in leaving behind their home country, and now having to make this declaration that they can't go home. It reminded me, there's on page 66, the chapter about Geraldo, no last name. Marin is out dancing with Geraldo, and they're coming home, they get in the car accident, and he doesn't survive. And it says, little was known about him. His name was Geraldo, and his home is in another country. The ones he left behind are far away. And that story, and again, thinking about the work that I do with clients, made me think about what kind of this sense of belonging. And I guess my question for the group is, what gives you a sense of belonging? Start there. Maybe a more pointed question. Have you ever, I thought about our clients again, have you ever lived abroad for a period of time? And did you feel a sense of belonging, and what did it take to get there?
One of the things that helps with the sense of belonging, particularly thinking about like international travel too, is knowing the language. We've talked about that already, but like being able to understand what's going on. And then as you spend more time, like knowing your way around. I studied abroad in, it was a semester around the world, but we lived in India. And there, you know, no matter how long we were there, at the end of the semester, we were still getting people who drove by to stop and, you know, say, oh, we want to take pictures with the white people. And so, yet I remember one story where we would always take rickshaws places, you know, and we knew, you know, how much things were supposed to cost to get to the places where we went commonly. And, you know, we'd agree on the price beforehand, and, you know, okay, that'll be rupees 30. Okay, great. That's fair. That sounds good. We get in the rickshaw, and, you know, one time I remember we got dropped off back at our hotel where we were staying, and he's like, okay, rupees 100. I said, oh, no, you said rupees 30. And I mean, the difference was not, the amount of money was not the difference maker. It wasn't that big of a deal. We could have paid it, but I ended up telling him, it's the principle of the matter. You told us 30. We know that's what it's supposed to be. But like, I actually was like, I feel like I belong here, in the sense like, okay, I know how things work. So I think like a familiarity with things. And then in terms of no matter where you are, I think a sense of belonging with personal relationships, like if you're somewhere or with a group of people, even if you're not physically in the same location, where there's common interests and experience and love, I think you can feel a sense of belonging, kind of regardless of place.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, but I had to put my like super gamer headset on, so I apologize. I'm not a
I thought
gamer.
it was your air
promise.
pilot.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm
captain.
doing. There you go.
Yeah.
I think too, honestly, like sometimes a sense of belonging if people look like you. So like I can remember the first time we went to Ireland as a family, and my mom got off the airport and she goes, oh my gosh, these people look like me.
Like them.
I'm home. And so I do think there's like a part of that. And like you were saying, Jacqueline, like, you know, you also can stand out like a sore thumb, like when you know, because you're tall too. I'm tall. You know, you go someplace like Spain where you're tall and you're blonde. It's like the jig is up, you know, they know who you are. And so you don't feel like you can assimilate, because there is some like, oh, they're tourists, they're foreigners, kind of that thing. So I think there's like a sense of like belonging in community where you feel either a shared language. I think coming from the US, where we're potentially a little more diverse, like, you know, potentially at least the people we surround ourselves are more diverse, maybe we would feel more comfortable in other cultures. But I wonder if it's the same way, like if, you know, if you're coming from the Unhcr tribe in Ethiopia, which are very tall, dark people, kid you not, my Unhcr clients are all like 6'8", like literally their 4-year-old looks like he's in 6th grade. But I don't know if they would feel as comfortable coming here to, like, you know, where there's a lot of white people, you know, what does that do? And what is your cultural relation to people of a different race or ethnic? Like, how has that culturally been an issue for you? Is it, I mean, to say like kind of like we talked about bad relationships with police officers, are we also talking about like, well, the only white people I've ever encountered have been really mean to me, so I don't trust you, like, because of my past experience, or, you know, that kind of thing. No, gosh. Okay, I told you she was coming, guys. Here's my cat.
There's Ruthie.
Yep.
I recently listened on Audible to Noah Trevor's like 5-hour biography.
Born a
And
Crime.
it was, I thought, very interesting. And he talked about all the various languages you needed to be able to speak, and his feelings of being an insider, outsider, et cetera, because he was biracial. And so he was not in either group, but he needed to know like 6 languages, and he would know when somebody was speaking ill of him. I found that a very interesting and short listen on Audible. So if any of you have Audible and you want to go look it up, I found it very interesting.
Trevor Noah's Born a Crime.
Yeah, Born a Crime.
Yeah. He's from South Africa, for those of you who don't know.
Oh,
so he was born during
sorry.
apartheid. No, it's okay. Just providing some context.
I'm going to make just a tiny comment of not being a foreigner, but my father at age 45 had a midlife crisis, moved our whole family to Columbus, Mississippi, which was a minimum of 12 hours from here. All of our family was either in Indianapolis or in central Illinois. So I have about a 6-year period of time that I wasn't around my cousins. I would see maybe my grandmother once a year. When you have a bunch of kids in the family, you don't hop on an airplane. I wasn't on an airplane until much later in my life. And so we really were, and the language was a lot different in Mississippi than it was here. I had to have my next door neighbor say my spelling words to me because I flunked 1st grade spelling test, because the way she said it had nothing to do with it, the way my mother from central Illinois, Peoria, said my spelling words. So it was a new place, new weather, people I didn't understand, and all of our family was up here. So my cousins here will now talk about, oh, remember when we all, or at the family reunion when, and I was cut out of all of that because of the period of time that we were away from this area. So I can only imagine what that does to children whose families have moved. I mean, the parents obviously know why they're doing it, but for the kids, it would have to be a scary mystery as to what all had happened to their life by moving them away.
Mm-hmm. And unlike you, who got to see your cousins and family again, like Megan said, many of them will leave them behind and maybe never see them again.
Exactly.
Which is incredibly hard to fathom. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to go back to you, Rachel, but I was going to say, so Rachel talked earlier about a time that I asked her to come to the airport with me because I knew it was a case that Rachel had worked on. But anybody who knows me knows that one of the things that I most love about Exodus is what we call the airport welcome. And every year, the number of refugees that come through our agency, it ebbs and flows. Welcoming clients at the airport is it's a shared responsibility amongst our staff. But I think, like myself, most of my colleagues consider it a privilege to do that. And I feel like every time I'm at the airport, I'm sort of just really overcome by that moment, because if you really stop to think about what that means, it's really an intimate part of someone's life, someone that doesn't know me and doesn't know this interpreter. And I think a lot about the vulnerabilities in that situation. I'm going to tell kind of a funny story that has a lot of folklore at Exodus about, Katie, maybe help me out. It was maybe about 6 years ago. Katie knows this story is coming. Maybe 6 to 8 years ago. So actually, let me back up just a little bit. We know when a refugee or a refugee family is coming. We have their flight information, we know their names, we know a little bit about them. And we're kind of preparing for their arrival. Where if they need housing, we're buying food and all this. We're putting beds in the apartment. So we know we're ready. We're at the airport. One day the airport calls, and sometimes this happens. The airport calls because the clients are lost in the airport and they can't figure out where we are. But the airport calls in an early morning, and the colleague of mine answers the phone, and the airport says, "This family is here, and why aren't you here?" And my colleague is checking the airport calendar, and he doesn't see any arrivals, and he says, "We weren't expecting this family, but we'll come." So 2 co-workers jump in the car, they grab car seats, and they go to the Indianapolis airport. They arrive, and there is a Karen family from Burma at the airport. And something you might not know about refugees: when they travel, one person will wear a lanyard, and on the lanyard on the back, it says, "My name is blank. I may not speak English. I am a refugee. I need help. Please call." And it has the name and the phone number for the agency that's receiving them. So they arrived at the airport, and someone showed them their tag, and the airport called us. And my coworkers are speaking to them. One of my coworkers happens to speak Karen, and the first question they say is, "Where is our mother?" So it's what appears to my colleagues to be a man and a woman and 3 small children. And he says, "What do you mean, where is your mother?" And they said, "Well, she was with us until we got to Chicago and someone took her." And my colleagues are in a panic. We didn't know this family was coming, and now we have lost someone. So they are trying to remain calm. They go to the ticket counter, and we have this, well, actually, I don't think they had it at the time. Anyways, they go to the ticket counter and they say, we were called about this family, and we're missing someone. And there's some sort of note in the airport system with a woman's name and phone number. So my coworker calls and says, "My name is Amanda. I'm calling from Exodus Refugee in Indianapolis, and I'm trying to find out where this woman went." And the woman had turned out to be a flight attendant, and she saw in Chicago, there was a lot of mistakes that happened along the way. She saw this family kind of deposited at the Chicago airport and left to be stranded overnight. And she thought the woman was an elderly woman. She thought, "This woman can't stay in the airport. I'm going to take her with me." So the flight attendant got her on a flight to Cincinnati, Ohio, kept her overnight, and was hoping and waiting for that phone call from someone to say, "Where is my mother?" So made arrangements to then drive this woman from Burma to our office in Indianapolis. Our executive director at the time was in a panic about the trauma of this situation. She's a licensed counselor. She was basically at the curb when the car pulled up, and this sweet little Karen grandmother gets out of the car, and she's in Karen telling a colleague, "The beautiful scenery between Cincinnati and Indianapolis. I've never seen anything like it." So the story plays out okay, because grandma is safe, and she got some food, and she loves Cincinnati. And but I tell this story because again, of this unique vulnerability, and this just trust in humanity and goodness in people. And this, we talked about this idea of no speak English, about what that does, and how that could have played, story could have played out very differently. But again, kind of getting back to this idea of being at the airport, this family, like that moment of their arrival, in my opinion, is so critical, and it's so pivotal. And I've kind of thought, like, you're here and you're safe. Are you welcomed? Do you what will it take to make this your home? And I guess when I read this book, one of the things I thought about, I think I gotta find my notes about the quote, but she says something, let me look at it. She says, "You will always," page 105, "you will always be Esperanza, you will always be Mango Street, You can't erase what you know. You can't forget who you are. So actually, I think my question is, we have this expectation, and we want clients, we want them to be safe, but how do we maybe navigate using the words assimilate versus integrate, right? I have such expectations for a family when they arrive. I want their children to thrive. I want their children to be whatever they want. I want people to feel a sense of belonging, and I want them to learn English, and I want life to be easy. But where's that balance of where's home? Is my expectation of home for them maybe inappropriate? What are people's thoughts about that?
I think, Megan, can you explain? I think for me, it's like very, okay, so I've watched the movie called The Good Lie or A Good Lie. I can't ever remember the preposition there, with Reese Witherspoon. And it's about refugee resettlement, which it's not totally accurate, and I get that. But like one of the things that strikes me in that is like that they leave them Jell-O in the very scene. Like they leave the refugee family Jell-O, which they're like, I don't know what to do with it. And it just sits on the counter and melts all night. So Megan, I don't know if you can share a little bit about what Exodus does to welcome a family to their home, and in an attempt to help them view this new place as their home, maybe.
Yeah. So from the airport, typically non-COVID, we would be at the airport, and we would take a family back to their house. One of the things that we do is we provide what we call a culturally appropriate hot meal. So we're not serving Jell-O, and we're not picking up a pizza.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Jell-O, but you know.
Actually, some people would rather have, I think, McDonald's or fried chicken. Honestly, there's, it's to each his own.
Right.
But yes, in our work, one of the things we do is try to give a sense of familiarity. I think somebody said earlier about it was Amy that said, you're leaving everything familiar behind. So this home cooked meal by a community member who maybe speaks your language, or prepares similar foods, is something that we do. And then honestly, we spend a lot of time walking people through their apartment that first night. Depending on a client's background, everything in that apartment may be very new to them. So we're working with refugees who have spent 17 years in Nyarugusu refugee camp in Tanzania, and they've ported water, and they've used pit toilets, and that's been life. So using the thermostat is new, and tucking the shower curtain into the tub is new, and locking the door, and looking through the peephole is new. Cooking on an electric stove is as opposed to an open flame or a gas stove is new. We have specific food lists. So when we buy food for new arrivals, it's food ideas that we've gotten from community members that may be appropriate. Like our Congolese families, for example, it's critical that they have fufu. That's a staple of their diet, just like rice is a staple of
What
the diet.
What did you say?
Fufu.
Fufu. What is
Fufu.
that?
It's like, maybe Katie can help me.
Is it like, it's not a meat, right? It's some sort of.
No,
like
it's a grain, if you will.
Yeah, it can be like cassava.
Okay.
Or yuca that's ground into a flour. It's used to make a starchy food, similar in the texture of Play-Doh, actually. If you think of Play-Doh, it's like a starch, and you would eat it with like a stew or soup, similar to like you would use a potato or rice.
Interesting.
It's a flour.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to know. I never heard about fufu before.
Well, yeah. Now it's
not a little bunny named Fufu, is it?
Not a little bunny named Fufu. No.
Megan.
Yeah.
I was just going to share with you that when I was working more closely with Catholic Charities, I had the privilege and the honor to greet people, families coming in at the airport, or even when they were arriving at the apartment. And it's really it's kind of surreal to be able to be there and to know that people are seeing things for the first time, not understanding how, and they weren't just Hispanics, they were, from different countries. The challenge was when I didn't know the language, to do it so they understood. But to think of the little thing, flushing the toilet, for example, or running the shower, little things like that, that we take for granted. And it is such a humbling experience and opportunity to be able to welcome someone to be their first mentor or guide or teacher or whatever. And then, then they don't want to let go of you. They, because you showed them love, and you showed them respect, and you showed them a welcoming spirit, and it really is such a beautiful, humbling experience to be able to be there. I do miss that a lot. And there are still families that, not to that degree, and not necessarily asylees or refugees, but still a lot of the immigrant families who are newly arrived, like the family that's been here for a year and their kids were riding their bike by Post Road and they got hit and one of them got killed. Helping them through the, how do you find a funeral home? How do you bury your child? It's so a lot of them are good, feel good stories. Others are very painful, stories, having to teach families and parents very tough things in life. And, how do you comfort someone who, and especially when they say something like, I came to this country just so that I could kill my child, very poignant experiences.
Yeah. And with refugees, we welcomed, we've actually had a pretty busy last 6 to 8 weeks. We welcomed 33 families, I think. And one family came to us via Israel. They are Eritrean, and they know someone already here in Indianapolis. And I was chatting with him on the day of their arrival, and he came through the diversity lottery, a different path many years ago. And he talked about how his experience, he didn't even have the support. The services that Exodus provides are limited in nature, both in terms of time and financial support and resources, and really making that journey alone too is another experience. Again, back to Geraldo in the book Geraldo with No Name. That they talk about he came and he was sending money to his family, and what that looks like to live in two worlds.
Well, I think we're close to needing to wrap up. Megan, did you have one last discussion point or anything? I mean, I think all you've said has been really it's been well said. So I appreciate your assistance and your leadership on that. But I wanted to make sure if you had anything else, and then we are going to follow up with a little bit, maybe some tangible ideas, some further reading, things like that. So.
Megan, could I make a comment on like the question that you raised, like on assimilation versus integration? One thing that always comes to mind to me is like I would hate for, I think the country, like our country is based on such like being a melting pot and having the benefit of all the different communities and cultures that exist, that to me it kind of reminds me of the little kids song, make new friends but keep the old.
Some are silver and the others gold.
Exactly. That like, yes, integrate to the point where you can feel comfortable and feel like you belong, but at the same time, like the things that make you, your differences are so special. And like I always hate when people feel like they have to assimilate and give things up. And like several people have mentioned here, like the thought, like when you come into the country, oh, we can't speak Spanish, we can't speak German, we've got to speak English, and we're American now. Like I think the beauty of America is that it's everyone. You
are right, fellow Girl Scout. You are right.
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, I love that answer.
So being at a university, I've seen a lot of students from throughout the world who come to further their education. But I'm aware through faculty and staff as well that we're a melting pot and everybody assimilates, but many of the groups have their own either church or community group that they can get together with once a week, once a month, so that some of the, like a Hindu group at Butler University, they all have the opportunity to get together and share their previous life and how they're assimilating and what they're doing. And I think that's also very necessary. I worry when people start talking about, oh, we're only going to be speaking English, because you're wiping out somebody else's identity.
And in a very real way, like you can also erase language very quickly when you do that. So
Right.
in particular, we see that with some of my Guatemalan clients who come from those indigenous areas. Some of those dialects, it is so hard to find somebody that can interpret for those dialects that quite literally, I heard on NPR that one of them, I think maybe mom, that there's only one mom to English interpreter and English to mom interpreter in the whole country, and he works at the Smithsonian. So like,
Wow.
so I had a storytelling. I had an asylum interview fairly recently for a client that speaks Chalchicheco. She's from an indigenous part of Guatemala, from Huehuetenango. And at the asylum office in this case was required to provide an interpreter. It took us almost 3 months to get it scheduled. And it went from English to Chalchicheco to Spanish to English. Wait, hang on. English to Spanish to Chalchicheco to Spanish to English. It took 7 hours to do the interview because everything was getting double translated. And so what has happened, at least from what I've heard and things I've read about the indigenous culture, is that like, it's not cool to speak your indigenous language in Guatemala. So they stop like saying it. So they only speak Spanish. So then we have this issue of clients not, like, literally that language is being erased. And like, there's going to come a point where it may go away. And that's sad. That's terrible. Who wants that, you know? So
Well,
I think that's the other part of like not encouraging people to be themselves and speak their language, is that we can lose that from not just like the US, but from the world.
yeah, I think some indigenous languages aren't written. So if they're
True.
lost verbally, they're lost forever.
Right.
So, you know, it's such a shame. But I agree. And I think that, you know, it's interesting to me because when the question was posed earlier about what is home, you know, for me, it came down to one word, and that's familiar, whether it's food or music or housing or sense. They're all markers for me of home. It's what's familiar. So then the question really becomes, well, how if you are born, if you're from a country of origin that's not where you're currently living, how do you make that current place home? And it could be the food, or it could be other ways, maybe connecting with a community or with a faith that is from your country of origin. But it's just kind of interesting to me that finding that balance between preserving what is authentically yours from your country of origin, while finding and accepting the new, right? Those things that aren't familiar. So it's really been an interesting conversation for me on kind of how do you find home in a place that isn't originally your home.
Yeah.
Rachel, if I could,
Are you
going
gonna
back,
say more things about my eyes now, Maria?
I would be happy to.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
Going back to the book and going back to something I've experienced, and I'm sure some of you have experienced too, because even though I'm an immigrant, I know that there are, you know, first and second generation immigrants maybe present with us today, or certainly in this country, who would experience the same thing. And I'm taking off on something you said, Megan. And it's such a reality for some people, and for some people, I mean, it's so vivid. And you saw that in the book, in the author, that it's living in two cultures. In Spanish, there's a song, I don't know how many of you know it. It's No soy de aquí, ni soy de allá. You know, I'm not from here and I'm not from there. And that was probably one of the toughest things. And to this day, I still experience it. You know, I'm not from here, I'm not from there. I went to college. I didn't belong with the Mexicans from Mexico, even though I was from Mexico, said, "Oh, you don't belong here. You know, you're Americanized. You know, so I wasn't really accepted, except for my charming personality. That got me accepted. No, I'm just kidding. But no, they didn't want to accept me because I wasn't recently arrived from Mexico. So when I went to the Mexicans, the Chicanos, those born here in the U.S., no, you don't really belong. So then they said, well, you're more white, so go to the white group. Nope, you're a minority, so you belong in the white group. And so then went to minority, which at that time, I'm talking about a time when we had to meet affirmative action, et cetera. So I was useful in that regard. I helped meet those numbers, but they said, no, you're not really a minority. You know, they were all African American. You're not really a minority. You're one of them, but we need the numbers. So, I always had this sense that no soy de aquí, where do I belong? And when you said about the living in two worlds, it is a challenging thing. And that's what I saw in her. Everything that she was saying, I looked at it, I said, gosh, that's what it's like when you live in two worlds, or you come from two worlds, if you will, whether you're born in one country and live in another. When you have when you're a bicultural person or a multicultural person, you're living in more than one world. And it's really hard to understand that unless, like most of us here, work with immigrants, with asylees, with refugees, or we are an asylee, an immigrant, or a refugee. So that really caught my attention when you said that's hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thanks so much for your comment. Guys, we're supposed to wrap up at 8:30, so I'm gonna kind of wrap us up now. By the way, I don't think all of my team had faith in us that we'd be able to talk for this long, but I think I have a sense we could go like another hour if we really needed to. So I do just want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and let you know that this is a 4-part series, The Power Disparities. So next in December, we're going to be looking at faith-based social services. And that book is called Generous Justice by Tim Keller. And you can go ahead and register for that at nclegalclinic.org. And then there will be 2 in the fall, one on the book Evicted and one on the book New Jim in the spring. I mean, I'm so confused. COVID has me all crazy. The spring one called On the Book Evicted by Matt Desmond, and the other one called On the New Jim Crow. And I cannot remember that author on the top of my head. But those should be interesting as well. So keep an eye on our website. Those will be every quarter. Melanie, thumbs up. Okay. Every quarter until I think the last one's in April. So I do want to leave you with some kind of positives, things you can do. So tangible steps you can take. One of the things is that the number of refugees admitted by each year is a number set by the president. It's an executive number. This year it's been set. Is this the lowest ever, Megan? 15 or 10?
It's 15 right now.
Yeah, 15. But it can change. If there's a different administration, it could change. That number could be amended. So regardless, I guess here's how I feel about it. Regardless, go vote. For one thing, yeah, Amy, really fast. I just want to say, like, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, I'm so encouraged by the numbers of early voting. I don't know if you all either are, but just like the number of people voting and participating in our democracy is so cool. Yes, Amy.
You said 15 or 10. What?
Oh, it's 15.
1,000. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Whereas the last year under Obama, it was 100,000. I think with some of those set aside specifically for Syrians. I should not be saying this. Megan should be giving you these details. She's them better in her head.
Yeah, actually, I'd be happy to speak to this right now because you could even take action before voting because the number is right now. But please vote. Yes. Yeah. And I too, Rachel, I'm encouraged. I love that. I mean, the statistics about Florida and Texas right now are that more people have voted than in now than they did in the election in 2016. So, but anyways, it is set at 15,000 right now. It was presented to Congress last week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, and it is still under discussion. Congress actually asked that they raise the number from 15,000. So I think there's opportunity to bring up with your representatives that number could be increased. And another, if you don't mind, is that number, like Rachel said, that it is categorized. So right now the categories are people who have, persecuted religious minorities, Iraqis, a certain category of Iraqis who were impacted by the war. There's a category specific to the Northern Triangle, folks in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And then others who were referred by an embassy or a consulate or gained access via family reunification, some of the work that Rachel has done. New this year are nationals of Hong Kong, Venezuela, and Cuba. That's a new distinction. But what has been removed and was removed last year is UNHCR referrals. So I talked about these 26 million people living under the care and protection of UNHCR. And right now they do not have a path to resettlement in the United States because that UNHCR referrals was taken off of the determination. So I'll speak up about that as well.
As Amy, I heard Amy mentioning when I was trying to fix my speaker about these kids from the 6th grade class that I spoke to about, they read a book and now I can't remember what it's called, but basically about somebody who had journeyed across the southern border and just kind of the difficulties they faced. And they asked really good questions about what my practice was like and who they were. But one of the tangible things I told their teachers, and one of the things I'll tell you, is that like, I love to give handwritten notes to clients, particularly like when they're going through a tough time. So I asked this class if they would write letters to my clients who had just become citizens. And so one of this was a letter that I had gotten from a 6th grader who wrote about how proud she was of him to be able, or he, so it says, I'll read it to you quickly. It says, "It takes so much courage and bravery to pass the border and start a new chapter in life. And well, you did it. I can't wait for you to start your new chapter here. Yours truly," and then the client's name. So I think like little notes like this are so encouraging to our clients. Like I will sometimes, when I send an approval notice, it's congratulations, you become a US citizen. I'll stick one of these and it says, this is from, somebody in Indianapolis, so that they feel that. So if you feel moved, or I don't know if you have children and they feel moved and they want to write a couple of letters, you can send them to me. And I will be happy to share them with some of our new immigrants who are in a more stable part of their life once we're able to do that. One of the other things that I think is quite helpful, and it related to what my mom said about her not being able to spell certain words because she didn't understand them when the teacher said, is helping us help immigrants practice for their citizenship exams. So if they practice with somebody who speaks like them and then they get into the exam and the person has a New York accent, they're going to fail the citizenship exam because they don't understand the way the question is being asked. So in a very real way, it's very, very helpful for us to like set like a time up. We can, and it's one of those things we can do via COVID, right? Like I can set a client and a volunteer up on a Zoom, and you can practice going through those 100 questions with them so that they get used to hearing it from a different accent, a different person. So if that's something you're interested in, you can certainly contact me or the clinic as well. That is something tangible that we can do right now to help immigrants. And obviously we always could use volunteer support. Sometimes we could use, obviously monetary support, could use your prayers, things like that. Megan, do you have anything specific that Exodus could use right now from our group?
I'm looking for a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side. So if you, that's a very specific ask, but we've, all of these 77 people who came, we've had to find 25 apartments in about a month's period. So that's what I'm looking for right now.
Okay. And Exodus also has an Amazon wish list, I believe. So in terms of purchasing items for these newly resettled refugees, or
How would you find that?
Megan, can you share the link with me, and then or maybe put it in the chat if you can find it quickly?
We'll try.
Okay. we'll see if we can put it in the chat and then maybe we can get it out. But that is, I've purchased a couple of umbrella strollers before, things like that, depending on what they need. And reminder, like, car seats may not be a thing where they were living because they may not have had cars, but now they need car seats. So things like that too. And that's a good way to do that.
Megan, I found the wish list, by the way.
Oh, thank you. She was faster than me.
Okay. Okay. It looks like it just got put in the chat. So if you're interested in doing a straight donation from to Exodus, that's a great way to do that. Obviously, both of us will welcome your non-immigration or non-Amazon donations as well, as if you feel called. And then just on some further recommendations, some further reading. So there is a book called Welcoming the Stranger, which is a biblical view of immigration. It explores what the Bible calls us to in welcoming the stranger. And that is a really great book. It was put together by the Wesleyan Church. There's a book, which I have not read yet. I started reading, but I haven't finished yet, called Tell Me How It Ends. It's an essay and 40 questions on the immigration experience. And then also there's a book called There Goes the Neighborhood. It's by Ali Noorani. And it is kind of exploring what happens when there's some integration maybe in your community. Any other books, Megan, that you had? I had a couple of videos as well, because I am obsessed with PBS. But
actually, I'm going to defer to Katie on that. Katie's our reader.
Anything else we should know, Katie?
Oh, I have lots and lots of books. I don't know. I can send out lists. Exodus.
Yeah,
is
why
also
don't you
posted.
send me a list and maybe we'll get it posted on our Facebook page too.
Sure.
Yeah. So then a couple of movies / documentaries that I recommend, because this is who I am. If you've never seen The Lady, I actually saw that this is on Prime, I think. It's a book. It's a movie based on the life of Aung San Suu Kyi, who was a real leader in the democratic movement in Burma. I had a lot of love and respect for her in 2012. It may have changed slightly based on some of her current actions, but I still think she's a very interesting leader. It kind of describes kind of what happened in Burma. So that's interesting. It's called The Lady. It is a fictional movie, but it's an adaptation. There's this Exodus, which is about the migration out of Syria into like Turkey and things like that. It's a PBS Frontline documentary. And then the one I recommend and make all of my interns watch, even though it's a little old, is called Well-Founded Fear. It's a POV documentary. It's about the asylum process. Now, it takes place in the early 90s in New York. So it is mostly Chinese people, but it is actually still pretty accurate about how the asylum process works in the US. And they describe something in this called officer roulette, and it is very much true. It just depends on who you get and the mood of that person on that day, whether your client's going to be approved or not. So these are my recommendations for movies you can watch. I want to end tonight again by saying thank you, but then also reading you. Every book I read, I get a favorite quote from, and I try to think about it. This one was actually pointed out to me by my mom, but it is why I do what I do. So she says on page 18 of the introduction, "We do this with no capital except our valuable time. We do this because the world we live in is a house on fire and the people we love are burning." And that's exactly why we do this, because these are God's most vulnerable. These are the world's most vulnerable. I mean, among other vulnerable populations, but we know that Jesus would be sitting with the immigrant. We know that the immigrant is important to him. And I think for each of us, no matter if we work with homeless veterans or we work with low-income taxpayers or we work with survivors, it's because we see that their house is on fire and that they are burning, and we have the power to do something about it. And so I just want to encourage you all in your volunteer work, in your prayers, if you can think of us, but also know that that's why we do what we do. So I thank you all so much for joining us. I'm happy to stick around, but you are welcome to go if you have any questions or any thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Whoa, everybody go quick. Get out of here.